Before we introduce our first speaker, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay Burke, who's on our board and volunteered to do a land acknowledgement for tonight. So I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Lindsay Burke, a 350 board member. Thank you for being here this evening with us. Just a few blocks away from where I'm seated at my desk here with my computer and my cup of tea, watching spring's verdant greens and blossoms unfurl, and a cardinal bounce on a budding lilac branch, one can walk down my town's main street to find a vibrant downtown full of art galleries, shops, and restaurants. A pleasant river, the Neshabie, whose Abenaki name translates to full of water, is diverted to flow around the downtown buildings and under a culvert to continue on its way to meet the windy Otter Creek, who will eventually join waters of the lake between, Lake Champlain, with the destiny of journeying to the great Atlantic Ocean. This, of course, has not always been the way here in the lowlands of Vermont's Champlain Valley, at the foothills of the Green Mountains. In this town we now know as Brandon, but was once called Neshabie. I'm not referring to the salty Champlain Sea that sat here 13,000 years ago, before Lake Champlain tasted sweet, or even the glacier that 2.5 million years ago towered a mile high over where my little house now sits, minutes from the Brandon Swamp. I'm not even talking about how 500 million years ago, my laptop and I would be swimming deep beneath the primordial Iapetus Ocean. No, I'm thinking about 500 years ago, before a Frenchman named Samuel Champlain set foot in what is now called Vermont, before Europeans from various kingdoms, all with a similar imperialist purpose, appeared on these lands to trap small animals and sell their furs, to cut down ancient old growth forests in the name of farming ruminant animals, to colonize these valleys, mountains, lakes, and rivers in the name of manifest destiny and the discovery doctrine. I'm thinking about the Winooski Abenaki and the Mohican, who at various times hunted, fished, foraged, wove, laughed, danced, prayed, survived, and thrived here on this land, where the Neshabie River jumps her banks and fiddleheads unravel their spiral heads in the spring, where deer, raccoon, fox, squirrel, chipmunk, and woodchuck roam among the birch, maple, beech, and pine forests, where blueberries are abundant for picking and peregrine falcons nest through summer, where maples awe us mortal humans with their shocks of reds, oranges, and yellows, signaling the coming of the snow, the ice, the shortened, darker days of winter, when bears and humans alike spend more time sleeping, slowing down, resting. The Winooski and the Mohican are still here, still hunting, fishing, foraging, weaving, laughing, dancing, praying, surviving, and thriving. Despite the Brandon Training School's successful sterilization program, despite forced assimilation and migration, and the state's denial of their existence. They are still here, remembering how to be in right relation with the swamps, white cedar, red maple, willow, elm, and basswood, with the migrating geese who give us the gift of seeing their continental flights twice a year, with the monarchs and the milkweed, with all our two-legged, four-legged, winged, finned, rooted, and non-rooted relations, as well as with the land herself, of who we are one. They are still here, and I join them and invite fellow settlers on this land to honor the land and work to protect her against the ongoing extractive economy and be in community that celebrates the wonders that are here. I give thanks to the land and her original land stewards as I enter the season of sowing seeds and tending a backyard garden that will feed my body, my family, and my community, as well as the soil, the inevitable rabbit, vole, and woodchuck. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for kind of setting us off in that tone. Thank you. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Lily to introduce a brief intro about the issues around hydropower and to introduce our first speaker.
Hi, I'm Lily. Also on 350 Vermont Staff Collective and joining from Burlington this evening. So hydropower is the creation of electricity through the damming and then gradual release of water that runs through turbines. The classification of large or mega dam scale simply relates to the size of the project. Generally, a large-scale facility has an energy capacity of over 30 megawatts. Above that, we consider it a mega dam. Mega dams disrupt ecology, harm local communities, particularly indigenous communities in Canada, and are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, specifically methane, which is 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide in accelerating climate change over a decade or two. Vermont sources most of our hydroelectricity from megadams in Canada, primarily through a company called Hydro-Quebec, and we are the only state in New England that counts hydropower as renewable. Green Mountain Power, which supplies electricity to much of the state, claims their electricity is 100% carbon-free and more than 68% renewable. However, if you look at the mix, you see that it is 31.9% nuclear and 51.1% large hydro, both of which are rife with problems. One of our legislative priorities moving forward is to make Vermont stop counting hydropower in our renewable credits. So keep your eyes out for actions on this issue moving forward. To hear firsthand about the impacts of megadams on communities in Canada, we're delighted to have Roberta Frampton-Benefiel with us. Roberta is the Riverkeeper and on the board of directors for Grand Riverkeeper Labrador in Canada. Her group is a member of the Waterkeeper Alliance in New York, which consists of 300 groups worldwide protecting waterways. She was raised on the waterways of Labrador, and we're so happy to have her here with us tonight.
Thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction and saved some of the comments that I have on my very first slide. So thank you for that. So Sonia, are we ready to roll? There you go. Thank you very much. So again, I'm Roberta Benefiel, and I've lived in Labrador a lot of my life. I'll tell you a little story about that shortly, but yes, we are members of the Waterkeeper Alliance, and I'm also a founding member of the North American Megadams Resistance Alliance, that's NAMRA, and also a founding member of Dam Watch International, which is a group from a group of Indigenous folks in Manitoba, where many, many more dams are built, even as many as in Quebec. So their group was called Waniskatan, and we had a meeting a couple of years ago, and out of that meeting came the idea for a Dam Watch International group, and I got involved in that. So next slide, please. So thank you to Sonia and 350 Vermont for inviting me to speak tonight and explain only some of the major issues of hydro projects and some of the things that are happening up here. But first, I would like to acknowledge that we at Grand Riverkeeper Labrador work and live on the traditional homelands of the Inuit of Northern Labrador, which is Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Southern Labrador, which is called Nunatuavut, and the Innu Nation. Thank you so much. And then next slide, please. Our mission, of course, is to preserve and protect the water quality and ecological integrity of the Grand, which is also known on the map as the Churchill River, and for future users and for posterity through actions of public awareness, monitoring, intervention, and habitat restoration. This is the upper and lower Muskrat Falls area, which is one of the this is the area where one of the dams was built not long ago and is still not operating, but basically the dam is completed. This was a beautiful area. We used to go and walk down that little point and come on down around and, you know, sit around on the rocks and have our lunch. It was an absolutely gorgeous place. And look at it today. Next slide, please. This is what they've turned it into. This is the Muskrat Falls Hydroelectric Project, 824 megawatts, and it's the second dam on our river. The first one was built in about 1969. I think it came online in 1973, and it's 5,400 megawatts. And that power is owned, all except for about 400 megawatts, is owned by Hydro-Quebec until 2041. And that is the reason why, when you talk Hydro-Quebec, the projects that you buy your power from in Vermont, it's not just Hydro-Quebec. At any given point of time, that power is coming from my river, from our river on the Churchill, or as we call it, the Grand River. Next slide, please. So just a little map to show you where I am. I think I tried to put a star over there on Labrador. I think I got it a little bit off. Okay, that's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That's not where I live. I'm actually in Labrador, right at that inlet, right up around the Lake Melville. I'm not so good with the technology, but I'm learning. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've already explained to you that Hydro-Quebec currently owns over 90% of all the power produced on our river. And there's a contract that doesn't run out until 2041. And the thing about that contract is we're not even sure that at that point we will actually, Newfoundland and Labrador will actually own the power, because when Hydro-Quebec stepped in to help Newfoundland finish building the project after they nearly went broke trying to build the Churchill Falls project, Hydro-Quebec had the upper hand, and as always, and they made sure that they were totally protected. So while the company called Churchill Falls, CFL code, Churchill Falls Labrador Corporation, that runs the Churchill Falls project, while it has 51% ownership from Newfoundland and Labrador, it still has 49% owned by Quebec. And Quebec also has a veto possibility on the board. So we're not really sure how 2041 is going to make out. So it could be that Hydro-Quebec may still be involved with the Churchill Falls project, the original one, the 5,400 megawatts. Next slide, please. So as briefly as I can, and it's pretty hard to be brief about this one because my story goes back a good many years, because I'm a good many years old. So I just want to tell you a little bit about how I got to be involved in this project. Growing up in Labrador, of course, I spent many summer days down by the water, down by the Grand River. And back then we used to call it the Hamilton River. It's changed names so many times, but we're taking back the Grand River because the Innu called it Mishtashipu, which means the Great River or the Grand River. And that's what the trappers who applied the river to go trapping upstream also called it Grand River. So we're taking that name back, and a lot of people now call it the Grand River. So I grew up here till I was about 19. My family moved back to Newfoundland in 1967. I moved on to a community college and met my US Navy husband there, and ended up moved to Tennessee. So I came back to Labrador for the first time in 1979. I was totally shocked by the devastation I witnessed in my community. At that time, the American base at Goose Bay had just shut down, and everything was pretty much devastated. It's a one industry town. People were just moving away, and buildings and homes were just left shattered, and nobody like taking care of them. Basically, the community was dying. And then I didn't come back until 1989. But in the meantime, things started to change a little when the Germans, the Dutch, and the Italians, and some other allied forces came in and made good use of the base and built some new infrastructure, and started the low-level flying practice. And that got people's jobs. And still, though, it was basically a one industry town. And it still is, honestly. So all of that went aside because low-level flying had to be stopped because of the invention of this new SAM missile, which was a surface-to-air missile that could shoot these airplanes down without, you know, if they're flying low. So all of that stopped. And here we were, you know, trying to get jobs for our people. My friends and I got involved, same group, same small group. My friends and I got involved with the forestry industry, trying to get our government and local people involved in forestry and stop shipping 2x4s in here from Quebec, because we have, you know, massive boreal forests. And that didn't seem to work because, again, government had their eyes on, you know, huge lumber mills with huge buildings. And how can we possibly do that instead of going with the small local community stuff that we could, you know, buy our own lumber from our own people. I was very busy with construction business. I was in painting and gyprock finishing, or plastering, we call it up here, from 1989 when I came back for another visit, but I stayed this time. And so I didn't have a lot of time to do much of anything community-wise because I was busy and always tired. And so along about 1995, I thought maybe I should start thinking about getting into another career. So I decided to go to university, and I thought I might go into occupational therapy because occupational therapy seemed to be something that my construction work would get me into. So I went to Mount Allison University, and my very first class was in geology with a wonderful professor named Dr. Ferguson, a good Scot who taught myself and a few others of my classmates what single malt Scotch was. And I've been hooked ever since on the single malt and on the earth sciences. And so that's where it began. My love of the earth sciences. And then, a couple of years later, my concerns for what was being proposed on that river again that I remembered so well, another 2 dams, Gull Island and Muskrat Falls. So I made my first presentation on the impacts of the proposed projects of Gull Island and Muskrat Falls in 2000, back with when in my environmental economics class. And so it hasn't stopped since, really. So next slide, please. That's as brief as I could get 30 something years into. So just for a little bit of context, this is my mom and dad in 1948, 49, somewhere around there. We used to go take a motorboat trip, so they tell me, because I don't remember, I was only a couple of years old, but they would go up to Muskrat Falls, and there were rocks at the bottom of the falls, and you could sit and listen to the falls roar down over. And I apologize up front for the dogs, because I have 7 of them in the house, and if someone moves in this house, they start to bark. So I hope they'll calm down. Anyway, this is a picture of my mom and dad on those rocks, and I've treasured this picture for years, and they're both gone now. And so are the rocks. Actually, the rocks have been flooded. So it means a lot to me, that river. Okay, next slide, please. So Denise Cole is on our board and is an Indigenous woman, and she had intended to be presenting tonight alongside me, but she's just moved away to St. John's and she could not get her time off to do it. So I've used a few of the slides that Denise used in another presentation to kind of bring her here in spirit. So here is her slide talking about the human impacts of mega dams from an Indigenous perspective. Next slide, please. So this is an article that came out on the internet. A Canadian energy company is about to expose the Inuit community to toxic mercury. Children could be born with lower IQs for generations, scientists say. That company was Nalcor Energy, and that's the company that was going to build Gull Island and Muskrat Falls. So an almost 2-week occupation at the site of this multi-billion-dollar project in Labrador is just winding down after Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Dwight Ball vowed to make all future decisions on science-based research. And that makes a significant victory for the Inuit, whose protests and strikes were based on studies out of Harvard University. And the reason they had Harvard University come to Lake Melville and do the studies on methyl mercury was because Nalcor Energy said that building the 2 dams would have absolutely no impact with methyl mercury beyond the mouth of the river out into Goose Bay and down near the community of Rigolet, which is an Inuit community. So people started protesting, and this is the culmination. People went on the site and occupied the site for 5 days. So I would like to, next slide, please. I'll try to explain how all of that went down. So just a little bit about the methyl mercury, if you're interested, this USGS site right here, https://pubs, whatever. And I'm in my closing slide, I've put my email address, and we have tons of peer-reviewed information and articles that are available for you to review and read. And if you really want to get deep into this, please email me and I will definitely send you whatever list that we have that you can look at. So methyl mercury actually is a bioaccumulation problem. It is acted on down in the water after the reservoir is flooded by little bacteria. And of course, the little tiny phytoplankton and whatever eat the bacteria. The fish eat the phytoplankton. The bigger fish eat those, and all of it bioaccumulates in the fat and tissue of the animals right up to, and you can see a picture here of the man about to harpoon a seal. And so that stuff, that poison can cause neurological disorders, and it's best known as the Minamata disease, where some industrial plant over in Japan dumped a whole lot of mercury into the water, and people were suffering for years with methyl mercury disease called Minamata disease. Next slide, please. This is the group on the site as they, oh no, puppy, calm down. This is the group that went on the site and occupied the site for about 5 days. One of our journalists from the Independent named Justin Brake went in with them and was later charged by the government for breaking an injunction. And so this is just smiling faces from when they were on the site. Next slide, please. So this is another slide from Denise's presentation. So she talks about continued colonialization. And what she means by that is the fact that we have an offshore government in Newfoundland, which is like 600, close to 700 miles from here, making decisions for Labrador from their point of view and not really consulting with any Indigenous people here, or at least not many. If you look down here at this next bullet, the divide and conquer one, you'll see that the reason why she has that in there is because what the government has done has made a deal with the Innu people of Labrador, but then totally ignored the 2 Inuit groups. And so that's what she means by divide and conquer. A destruction of Mother Earth is absolute, And I'm going to touch very briefly on that at the end about the global impacts. Violence to the land, she says, is violence to the body, which is true. So there was a loss of cultural practices, traditional foods, and sacred spaces by flooding those spaces, especially the Smallwood Reservoir, which used to be, which was flooded by using something like 200 dikes. It's not actually a dam at Churchill Falls. It's all of these little small areas and a river diverted into this huge reservoir, which is big enough to put Prince Edward Island inside, and it would sink to the bottom. You'd never even see it. But in that flooding, they flooded all the trappers' equipment, the graves of the Innu, and nobody even knew it was happening. So truth and reconciliation is a call to action that needs to happen, especially about dams, and especially here in Labrador and all across Canada, because Canada is on the way to building another 153,000 more megawatts of dams, because they believe that it's clean and green hydro. And we disagree totally with that. So in our area, we have the mega project realities. We have the mega, the man camps, the drugs, our cost of living went up, the grocery store prices went up, rent went up to where people, ordinary people here in town a lot of people had to couch surf because they couldn't afford the prices for rent, because people were renting to these contractors for like 3 and 4 times the cost that a small apartment used to rent for. So the injunctions, I mentioned injunctions a little while ago. Nalcor Energy would go to the government of Newfoundland and ask for an injunction to keep the protesters away. As you can see up here, here's a bunch of protesters talking about their interest in being taught, being consulted, and so on. So next slide, please. This is Beatrice Hunter. Beatrice was in court facing charges on one of those injunction charges. She spent 11 days in Her Majesty's Penitentiary in St. John's, which is 1,000 kilometers south of her home, because she refused to sign an order saying she would not go back to the site. Next slide, please. Here are a bunch of Labrador land protectors and Grand River keepers on the road outside the gate that was stormed by the people on the site. The community of Happy Valley Goose Bay, when the flooding was imminent and nothing had been done about about removing soil and whatever for the mitigation of the methyl mercury. Everyone was involved. Everyone was worried. The whole community came out to help us. So next slide, please. This is my my partner, Jim Learning, who passed away 2 years ago in April. He also faced charges for breaking a court injunction. He was also on a 10-day hunger strike. It ended up in 6 days, but he intended it to be for 10 days at least. And he was just trying to bring awareness to the methyl mercury and the other major issues of the project on our community. So next slide, please. Marjorie Flowers, an Inuk woman from Rigolet. Remember I said that the methyl mercury was could flow into the fish and seals and up the food chain to humans. And Marjorie's community of Rigolet, which is just out Lake Melville from us, is a community that fishes and hunts and hunts for seals in the spring. In fact, they were out there a couple of weeks ago. So they are seal hunting and catching birds and catching traditional food for their families in Rigolet, because Frankly, they can't afford the store-bought foods. It's just so expensive. If you can imagine paying something like $125 for a turkey for Thanksgiving, and 4 little freezer burned hamburgers in a Ziploc bag were on sale for half price. And the half price was $14.50. So the full price of those 4 little hamburgers was $28.99. If you can imagine paying that for 4 little hamburgers, and then trying to tell the people in Rigolet and all of the Inuit people and Innu people and all of us who live here in Goose Bay, that they can't, if they eat any more of this food, it's going to be poisoned with methyl mercury. So we're taking a chance. But, for those people in Rigolet, they have no other choice. So we can't keep doing that to people. And you must understand too, that this is not just here in Labrador. This is all over Quebec. Every single dam that was built in northern Quebec, northern Manitoba, up in British Columbia, and even a few in Saskatchewan, are built on traditional Indigenous land. And most of the time without any consultation. And even if there was consultation, not enough for the people to have a voice that said, we want this to stop. We don't want our traditional food sources to be poisoned. Harvard study said that of the 22 more dams that are being proposed right now, 11 of them are within 100 kilometers of Indigenous communities. This is across Canada. So Indigenous communities are in the forefront of all of these impacts. And it's not just in Canada, it's all over the world. So next slide, please. I get kind of upset about this sometimes, sorry. So because of all the protests, our government and the premier at the time, Dwight Ball, said he'd strike for an independent environmental advisory committee, and that he would definitely pay attention to what they had to say. So the Environmental Advisory Committee, the IEAC, was struck, and they deliberated for about a year. I'm so sorry about the barking, but there's not a thing I can do about it. And then they made recommendations. So next slide, please. Anyway, the recommendations, I'm sorry, I took that slide out trying to cut down on the numbers. The recommendations from the IEAC were that Nalcor, before flooding Muskrat Falls Reservoir, should remove all the soil, the trees, and the vegetation. They gave the recommendation to Dwight Ball, to the premier, and they took it under advisement. It went on and on forever, for a year and a half. And guess what? Adding insult to injury on the fact that they were going to flood everything and some methyl mercury would come down, the government and Nalcor missed the deadline and no clearing was ever done, but they flooded the reservoir anyway, which is normally what happens in the, people, community doesn't matter. These massive projects are always done. The decision is made long before communities are ever contacted or asked what they feel about it. Next slide, please. This is just some of the people that were at the gates to the Muskrat Falls site, kind of giving support to the folks that were inside. So, and in the end, 28 people were charged, and some of them went straight to jail. Some of them signed an order saying they would stay away. But I've shown you a few pictures of some of the ones that would not sign and ended up in jail. Next slide, please. So here's an Inuit artist, Heather Campbell, and this is her depiction of what she feels about methyl mercury. This piece of art is now a part of the Winnipeg Art Gallery, a contemporary Inuit art collection. She was born in Rigolet, And she's now living back in Labrador. She's a member of the Labrador Land Protectors, and she sold these prints to help Labrador Land Protectors. Next slide, please. Not just in Labrador, as I said, here's Quebec Innu protesting the Romaine River Hydro Project. That's the last project that Hydro-Quebec just did. And according to the Harvard study, the La Romaine 4 is one of the most polluting dams that Hydro-Quebec actually owns. And that is in greenhouse gases, methane, whatever pollution could be talked about. La Romaine 4 is one of the worst. I have lots of information on that. If you'd like to reach out, I'll be happy to send it. Next slide, please. Here is a lot of people in Quebec who are protesting against Plan Nord. Plan Nord was Quebec's idea of developing the mines and the tourism and lumber in the north without consultation, of course. And so the Innu were protesting that. In fact, I have an article here that talks about the Innu. They walked 900 kilometers to protest the Plan Nord and the La Romaine dams. So this means a lot to the Indigenous people. And guess what happened? La Romaine, all 4 dams were built. Next slide, please. To tell you why we have some issues with Muskrat Falls, this is a picture of Mud Lake, the little community across the river from us. Mud Lake flooded in the spring of 2017. And this was after Nalcor had total control of the floodgates. So an independent, and I quote that word, expert was hired by Nalcor and claimed that Nalcor had no fault in this flood, that this was natural causes. This community has never flooded to this extent before. A few times it's come up over the banks, which you can see there in front of the houses, but never to this extent. And these community members, about 80 of them, had to be airlifted by helicopter off the top of their homes. So this is another issue with the dam, which is like 36 kilometers above the community of Mud Lake and the community of Happy Valley Goose Bay, where I live. Next slide, please. So the community impacts, again, just to go back over them, it's socio and cultural, it's crime, the cost of living, the housing, the employment problems, victimization, and the infrastructure and adjacency principles where they promise to hire people here in the community. And as I spoke about a little while ago, this community has been a single industry community since its inception back in 1943. When the war was, the Second World War was on, and the people from the United States and built up the Sac base, and people came in from all parts of Labrador to get paid work to help build the base. And so it's been a one industry town for all these years. And so, when a big project like this comes on, and promises to pay $43 an hour and those kinds of figures, then it makes it pretty difficult for a small group like ours to say, hey, this is not a good project. This is going to destroy this. This is going to destroy that. You can't possibly let this project go ahead. But our community needed the jobs. And what can you say to people who need work and need jobs? And at that time, of course, the low-level flying was slowed down and people were worried that there wasn't going to be anything for them to do. And so it got very difficult for us to come out against Nalcor Energy and the government of Newfoundland. So one other major issue, there's so many issues, I could not possibly cover them all in this presentation, but the North Spur is a natural dam. It has layers of quick clay, and quick clay is prone to liquefaction under heavy pressure or too much water, rain, or being pushed upon by, you know, a massive river that's 380 kilometers long. And they've used that as a natural dam. We have an expert from Luleå University in Sweden, Dr. Stig Bernander, and he still, as of 3 weeks ago, he and Dr. Leonard Elfgren from that university have sent another letter, still to this day, to the government of Newfoundland and to the builders of the project, saying you have not done the proper risk assessment to determine that the North Spur will not fail and wipe out Mud Lake and Happy Valley Goose Bay. So that's another major issue for us here. And, you know, here's the project's built and nobody's paying attention to these experts who are telling people, you know, just do another risk assessment, the type we're telling you about, because they live in Sweden and Norway, where they have these kinds of quick clay problems all over the place, and they are experts in that. But no, Nalcor wouldn't listen, and neither did the Newfoundland government. Next slide, please. So this is Denise's slide talking about the issues with the methyl mercury and the North Spur. The center picture on this slide is a photo that, or a depiction of what would happen if the Muskrat Falls dam broke, or if the North Spur broke. And this is part of the community down here in blue, Happy Valley Goose Bay, that would be totally flooded. So, and there's no evacuation plan that we know of. And in Mud Lake, it's impossible to evacuate them, because it would be like a 40-minute notice of the water coming at them, and there's no place for them to go. They don't have a road in. And unless it's, you know, in the summertime when they can get in their boats and get out of the way, but that's probably not possible with 30 to 40 minute lead time. Next slide, please. So back on some of the global issues, I want to say that there are 70,000 large dams in the world. They severely impact biodiversity, fisheries, the climate, permafrost thawing, sediment and nutrient depletion, thermal pollution, Arctic ice melting, greenhouse gas emissions, especially methane, and we found out recently water vapor. Water vapor is actually one of the worst greenhouse gas problems. And where does water vapor happen? On these massive reservoirs where so much water is open to heating and then evaporation. And, you know, all of this, I'm just amazed at what some of our group has found in documentation and peer-reviewed studies over the last year or two. I was just blown away with the water vapor issue, but they claim it is the worst greenhouse gas problem. And nobody is talking about that. And nobody is talking about greenhouse gas emissions from reservoirs and from dams. And nobody is including that in their list of greenhouse gas inventory for the UN. Nobody, not a single country is including any of those. And we have information that, you know, I'm going to read you something from the Council of Canadians that I found a week or so ago. Now I probably can't find it again. Anyway, the Council of Canadians says that these mega dams produce something like thousands, millions of greenhouse gas, millions of grams of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm not sure what that is, and I wanted to read it to you, but I think that's, I just want it to be true. Here it is. Here's what they say. Apart from the destruction of the rivers, hydro reservoirs across Canada annually emit as much as 1 million tons of greenhouse gases. They come from the breakdown of biomass, dead trees and plants left in the flooded area. So Canada does not advise the UN of those emissions, and neither does any other country. So again, let me say I can provide an extensive list of links and peer-reviewed studies and a few articles that corroborate everything that our group has found during our research over the past several years. So if you're interested in reviewing the studies, by all means, reach out. And there's my email address. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm sorry I went on so long. I really didn't mean to. I was going to try to make it very brief, and it's impossible. So thanks again. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions if we have some time, or in an email later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roberta. That was a lot of content from the science to the history to some personal stories. I really appreciated it. Thank you so much. We only have a few minutes for questions, but I actually, there's a few other people on the call tonight who are part of the North American Megadams Resistance Alliance. And I was just wondering, Noretta, did you want to say a few words? Up to you.
Hi, Noretta.
Oh, you're muted.
There. Hi, Roberta.
There you are.
Oh,
hi.
Thank you, Roberta. Okay, so am I good to go?
Yeah, if you wanted to just talk, if you wanted to just share a few words for a minute or two, we'd love to hear if you have anything to add.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Noretta Miswag, and I'm from I'm a citizen of the Pimicikamak territory in a reserve that is called by the government Cross Lake, Manitoba, Canada. It's in northern Manitoba, and we have our people have been directly affected by the dams. They're all we have a river that marks our territory, the Kitchisipi, we call it the Great River, but the government calls it the Nelson River. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit of how it's impacted our lives and what I think people need to know when they hear governments and these big billion-dollar companies say that it's clean. I have a video that will show you. This is my son, Thomas. This was a couple of years ago. And they were getting ready to go out hunting, and they couldn't reach their boat. I don't know if you can.
Thomas.
Wait. The water is like literally gone. It's supposed to come right up.
Was drunk Thomas?
Like the water is literally gone, and that's the spring. And in the spring we have our goose hunt. So to say, and then there's pictures of the winter where we need the water to be stable. We have the water coming up and causing conditions like this. How's it go? Like there's navigation is difficult when the water is like, we've lost people, a lot of people, too many people. And the thing with the dams is that the government started in the 1950s. They started the dam on our river, right? It's right by our reserve. I'd say about 20 kilometers, barely 20. It's really close to our reserve. It's right on our territory. And they started that in the late 1960s. And we had no idea about it until early 1970s when men were trying to go sturgeon fishing in the rapids. And so they thought, well, there's something happening. So people got together and, and this is to say, we were never going to win. We never had a voice. They were just going to do what they were going to do. And they have. And the way it's impacted our lives is in so many ways. The dam caused the rivers to be a lot lower than it naturally was, a lot lower. So everything changed. I think one of the biggest things that affected us was how we couldn't fish anymore and hunt and trap. So, they built us stores and we eat from this. Now we eat from the stores. When I was a kid, I'm 49 now. And when I was a kid, we had fish all summer, all winter. We had the ducks, geese in the spring and the fall, moose in the winter, rabbits in the winter, and we picked berries all summer. What was in our fridges was our traditional foods. We hardly had any. Now we eat cows and pigs. And it's just a really different diet that's caused the life that we don't go hunting, trapping, fishing. We're less active. It's caused a lot, like health-wise. So I can't even tell you the social impacts. I mean, there's been clusters of suicide epidemics throughout the years since the dam. The worst one being, I think it was in 2016 or 17, where we had 6 young people commit suicide within a matter of 8 weeks. It was bad, and it has a lot to do with having nothing when you had everything. I want to tell a story about my grandmother, who said that they used to come to Cross Lake, where we have only in the summers, and she said, we took the $5 and said we didn't even touch it. We just traded it right away. She said we had no use for money. They had no use for money in my grandmother's day. She died in 2001. And I'm thinking, how could you not have use for money? But they didn't need it. They had everything they needed right there on the land, on the water. And when you're not on the land, on the water, when that life changes, then you lose your relationship with the land and the water. And we lose the names of the fish, the plants, the medicines, the trees, everything that grows in there. We lose those names. So we lose our language and we have no relationship with the land, and we're so lost. And, like kids, the young people today feel like people tell them they're just lazy. They're not lazy. They just don't know. And we need to somehow go back to the land, but it's almost impossible with how it's impacted us. I mean, even the garbage, I was thinking, right down to garbage. We hardly ever had any garbage. Now that we have to shop from the store and buy all these things that we needed from the store, there's a lot more garbage. Our diet, I mean, we eat foods that are they're no good for us. Our medicines, some of them are, we don't know where to find them anymore, but we can. Right down to exercise. We used to be a very active people. When I was a kid, my aunties and uncles, we did everything. My uncles would fish. They'd bring them up. Aunties would gut and dress the fish, and we'd go hang them. So it like even the employment, I hear, when they said, when they had the negotiations for the dams, we'll bring you jobs. Barely a handful of people have permanent full-time jobs with GenPig, with Manitoba Hydro in Cross Lake. Whereas traditionally, we all had a role. And when you take away this life, when you take away this food, when you take away these traditions, this way of life, you take away those roles. So as a child, I lost the role as the kid who went to go hang the fish and go get them and wrap them and put them in the ground to store. The men had a great loss because they were providers, and when they couldn't provide anymore, they got lost. And the women, I think we're a little bit more fortunate, because as women, we're mothers, we're nurturers, and we still have to do that. We always have to do that. Navigation, we've lost our way along our very own territory because the landmarks, some of the islands are all washed out. The fish and the animals, we don't know if they'll be there or even if they're good to eat. And the biggest thing for me was I was a Cree teacher before I became an elected official. Language is lost, and in our language is how we relate to the world around us. And if we're not living in that world, on that water, on the land, doing these things, then it's gone, then it's lost. And how do we get it back? And how do we get hydro and people to realize that we're people, and we had ways, and we need help. We need help in saving this river because more projects are coming up. I don't think we need any more. We have 15 dams in Manitoba. I'm pretty sure, I think it was 7 that we needed to provide for all of Manitoba and export some. Everything else is just for money. I can go on and on, but I know we're pressed for time, and I wish I had some more pictures for you. But if you have any questions, I'm sure you can get my email address and on Facebook and Instagram if you want to find me there, if you want to ask any questions. But I'm working. I'm really working as a leader of our people to help them understand what has happened and how we need to go back, even just to go down the bank and touch the water, because we don't do that anymore. That's how lost we are. And I'm working, and I'm glad for you people who help people like me without a voice, give me a little bit of a voice. And I have such a, and I am grateful for your help. I won't take any more of your time. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Narita. It's so wonderful to have you here, and both Narita and Roberta, you've been doing so much great work together, and we really appreciate hearing your stories. And we really hope that the organizing we do here in Vermont can support the healing and health of your communities. And I did put 2 action alerts in the chat. I think we've got to move right into our second speaker. So if anyone has questions for Roberta or Narita, please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to get them answered. But I do want to make sure that we have enough time for our next kind of big topic of our big false climate solution. The first one was hydropower. And the second one, we're going to turn to our neighbors to the south and talk about the impacts that so-called renewable natural gas and biogas is having. So Narita and Roberta, thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Jael, who's going to introduce the next topic and the next speaker.
Hi everyone, I'm Jael, I'm a staff member and zooming in from Worcester, Vermont. So-called renewable natural gas, or RNG, is a greenwashed, cleaner sounding name for biomethane or processed biogas that can be delivered in pipelines. Biogas is primarily made up of methane, the same greenhouse gas that makes up fracked gas or fracked natural gas. It includes waste methane from landfills, sewage treatment plants, and factory farm livestock manure. Biomethane props up factory farms, sometimes known as CAFOs or confined animal feeding operations, that produce colossal amounts of manure due to the large concentration of animals. The technology converts factory farm manure and other wastes like sewage sludge or food waste into fuel. This has led to big ag partnering with energy companies, locking us into 2 polluting business models. One of the main reasons why we're concerned about this in Vermont is that using biomethane or RNG as an energy source encourages the continued build out of leaky gas infrastructure that locks in climate chaos. Vermont Gas Systems plans to source less than 1% of the total natural gas in their pipeline from renewable sources like this. RNG is a tool for the industry to use to justify our continued reliance on fossil fuels and to build more fossil fuel infrastructure like pipelines. RNG is used as a distraction, keeping customers reliant on fracked natural gas instead of transitioning to better and truly renewable options like solar or wind. Biogas and RNG are currently being classified as green energy sources in the Clean Heat Standard Bill H715 that is going through the Vermont Senate. 350 Vermont volunteers and allies have been working hard for many months to try to raise red flags over this issue. And we've been getting strong pushback from legislators, industry, and other policy experts. To discuss the problems with biomethane and biogas more, we are so happy to have with us tonight Maria Payan. When Maria's family lived next door to a large chicken operation, her whole family suffered. When her young son came out of the bath one day with palm-sized wounds all over his body, she was fed up. Maria now works to organize communities to fight CAFOs and biogas facilities throughout Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and New York with the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. She is committed to keeping independent farmers viable while striving to preserve our natural resources and rural heritage for future generations. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me. It's really, it's so similar listening to what we just heard, right? With the hydropower, with the electric, that here is a culture that's being stolen from a whole community of people. It's their entire culture. And this is what we see with all these forms of energy. It's really unbelievable.
We decided to do this one a little bit different. Maria and I were going to go back and forth and do a little bit of an interview, person on the street. But here you go. So my first question, Maria, is just the basic background. Like, can you please introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about how you first got involved in activism on these issues?
Sure. So I was a regular mother, a business owner, somebody just going about enjoying our rural lifestyle. We lived in rural Pennsylvania at the time where all this happened. And I had a small child. We lived beautiful, the pond in the back, farm across the street, animals on pasture. Life was good until the property got sold. When the property got sold, unfortunately, it was sold to somebody who was very politically connected, as well as an absentee owner of the farm, who all of a sudden changed the nature of how farming was done in our community. What we saw happening were confinement buildings, long metal barns going up one after another, after another, after another. And they got in where they were right underneath, at that time, what's classified as a CAFO. So they didn't need any kind of notice to the neighbors. It has to be 125,000, which is small in comparison to what they're doing today, but it was 25,000 birds per house. It was 100,000 birds, so they could just come in. And the next thing that we noticed was the cows on pasture turned into a cattle feedlot with underground liquid manure storage. And as time moved on, about a half mile as a crow flies, 5,000 pigs were put into confinement with underground storage. And I think that's why everybody says keep the first one out, because once it comes in, it really comes in. And so as a mother and a business owner, I can speak from personal experiences that when industry came in, because it is industry, these are not family type farms like what we used to have. And, you know, we used to be friends with the neighbors. They lived there. They cared about the property. It was a lot different. And the turnover rate was pretty high, where people would come in and be there trying to run an operation that basically, I guess they, a lot of times, had no experience with. So you would see all kinds of disasters happening. It was pretty frequent. But the problem is these facilities produce massive quantities of waste in comparison to animals on pasture, or when you're talking about putting, you know, tens of thousands of birds into one building, hundreds of thousands on a property, which is millions today in some farms. And what we saw happening was there was an immediate change. We had my 8-year-old started getting tightness in the chest, and I was running him to the doctors. 8 years old. We've never had these kind of problems before. Rashes all over everyone in the family, consistent headaches. There was one occasion that not only myself, but other neighbors called 911 at night because the gases from agitating the manure underneath of the cattle feedlot, when they do that, it comes into every vent in the house, every crack. We were actually dizzy inside our own homes, not outside, inside. The things that you experience is basically like living, it's almost like what a worker would experience that would be working there. And because of this, it's very hard for doctors to even understand, unless they're a doctor that deals with, you know, toxic, that kind of clientele, like a worker-related toxic substances, and you just don't have that around there. So the doctors were perplexed at what was going on. And you would tell them, I live across the street from, you know, an operation, and here's what's happening. But the problems, as I said, were significant. My child would get off of the school bus, and there were times that he vomited because of the stench in the air. And I would think as a mother and think, you know, when as a mother, oh my God, like there's toxins in my child's body that is forcing him to vomit when he smells this. You would see dust on the windshield because poultry operations are very, very dusty. And when I would drive out of my driveway, I would have to put the windshield washer wipers on, like all the time. And I would look at the film on the windows and think, oh my gosh, this is like, we're breathing all of this in. It's particulate matter. It's in our lungs. And it was what I call a slow death, right? When you see that species, various butterflies and birds that used to come to the property all around us all the time, it was beautiful there, were all of a sudden disappearing. The tadpoles, the frogs. I know I had told Sonia when we were talking that my child was in a tributary that went underneath a culvert in the road and fed into a pond. And he came up with a frog one day. He was catching him with a little net when he was little. And the frog had eyes going down its back rather than, and that was like, I think about the Aaron Brockovich movie where, you know, the woman finds out the water and her kids are in the pool swimming. And it's like that moment that switches on and you go into protective mode as a mother and you're like, that's it. You're not allowed in the creeks anymore. You're not allowed in because you know something is seriously wrong. And you have these very powerful corporations that we were just talking about They're very influential. They have big lobbying groups. They're in the pocket of the legislators. It is really sad that I think people, when they get into office, want to do the right thing. And I think as citizens, we have a responsibility to let our legislators know what's going on, our feelings, like what you're doing now with this bill. It's important because, you know, they have powerful folks that have lobbyists that are in their ear every day. So they need to hear from their constituents. But as Sonia was saying, as this went on, we had more and more problems. There was a mass mortality where 20,000 birds had died in the middle of summertime. I can still think about this and smell the smell that we smelled for months, because if you can imagine 20,000 birds baking in the summer heat, they were composted on site and they were composted improperly. Everyone had flies in their house for months on end. Months. I'm not talking about the occasional fly. I am talking like consistent in every room of the house, all over the place for a long time. This is not something that our homes should be. Our home should be a family place of security where you share meals, and it became a nightmare. It literally just became a nightmare. And the more that you tried to call the agencies that are deemed to protect you, you found out that there's no guy in a white hat coming to save you. The enforcement is not there. There's too much influence. That's why it's really important, and I'm very, very concerned with what's going on with the renewable energy. I think that you had it laid out brilliantly in the beginning, because this is what's happening. You know, this investment is supposed to be for things that are going to be renewable and sustainable, to take us in a direction away from fossil fuels. And what we're finding is this is not what's happening at all. Instead, this is becoming a new source of funding for a new waste stream that we really don't need to be investing, because what it's investing is more, right? It's entrenching not only the factory farming industry, but oil and gas. So it's creating something else that's not good for us, that we're going to be dependent on. And I know that you cherish your family farms there, like we do here, and the direction that it would take you in would be one that it would be hard to turn backwards. So I really hope that the experiences that I'm bringing to you tonight, that you understand these aren't unique to my family. I work as you know, you said, in many states for many years, almost close to 2 decades now. And I will tell you, there has never been a town where I have gone into where someone says, you know what, this is the model of how we should be doing farming. Because what you find is behind every one of these stories is a community with people just like me, just like my son, you know, being pulled out of the bathtub with blisters all over his body. And as a mother, you're saying, you know, I need answers. What's going on here? And no one's giving them to you. No one's writing stories in the media. Everybody's being quiet. You don't talk about this. And the system continues. And this, it's hard to put out, okay? Because the system is based on vertical integration. My state now, I'm in Delaware now. I left and abandoned, literally left my house my husband was getting cancer treatments. And during this time, they thought my son had cancer as well. And they wanted to test him. And that was the day that I was finally said enough. I said, you know what? I cannot watch my family get poisoned. No one is stepping in through all these years to do anything about this. I can stay here and watch my family's health decline. And it's pretty serious when you're going for, we're talking serious health problems, from respiratory, open heart surgeries, all kinds of breathing issues, cancer, which, by the way, the cancer that my husband had is very prevalent to workers that work in this industry. Now, why is that? You know, is it just coincidental? You have to ask yourself, and these things go through your mind, and you know this is not good for your family. But at that point, I would have lived in a cardboard box because that was the final straw. And that was the day that we left. Well, at least my son left. My husband still had weeks of cancer treatment, but I was so devastated and scared that I literally, my mother was living in Delaware. I said, you are staying with grandma. When daddy's done, then we'll be right behind you. Because I didn't want him staying there another day. You know, it's that serious. And it shouldn't be, right? You're living in an ag residential section. It's not like you're living in heavy industry, industrial zoning. You're living where supposedly things are supposed to be put to make sense. But the kind of farming we have now is not the farming that used to make sense being in ag residential zones. It is totally heavy industry. That for the most part is unregulated or self-regulated. So I think you take a revenue stream and direct it in a way where you do not have this kind of heavy, intense industry. You should do everything you can to avoid it and to fight back. As I said, Delaware, Sussex County, where I am now, is #1 in the entire country for broiler production. They just came out with a 50-year report on 50 years after the Clean Water Act. Delaware is also #1 in the country for the greatest percentage of impaired rivers and streams. What a coincidence. And 97% of our rivers and streams are impaired. 100% of our estuaries, 100% are impaired. We literally have a gentleman who retired here, who was the former executive director of the American Public Health Association. He is appealing to the state to declare a state of emergency. This is how bad this is. But you know what? Everyone's ignoring it. Let's pretend it's not happening, right? Because if you face it, then things are going to have to change. And we can't ask these important people to change. And that's kind of what you get used to hearing and what you get used to seeing. And that it's no way to live in a democracy. We're supposed to have a voice, and we're supposed to put things where they make sense. We're supposed to do things the way they make sense. And unfortunately, we find often that our voices are drowned out by those who have more money in their pockets and interests that are favorable to those industries and their stockholders that are benefiting.
Wow, thank you, Maria. That is a lot of hard stories. Thank you for sharing that. You're now spending a lot of your time trying to fight against the biogas facilities that are being built in your area. Can you explain a little bit about what biogas facilities are for, how they relate to these CAFOs, and what's going on with them? Where are they trying to get located? Who owns them? Are you seeing an increase? Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I have the feeling that this has been in the works for a while because in 2014, the way that the factory farm industry was operating changed all of a sudden. What used to be a 400-foot house that held 20,000 birds, and you maybe had one or two houses on a farm with acres surrounded, all of a sudden was being replaced with 10 houses, 20 houses that went what they were calling no land farms, which meant the houses went from edge to edge on the parcel, right next to a neighbor's house, a family residence. And now we had 50,000 birds per house, and the houses were 650 feet long. So that's bigger than a football field. So imagine having 20 of those as your next door neighbor. One parcel of land, one farm. No one can say that. Okay, so the way that they have come in and kind of, stood with a little farmer with a red barn and a pitchfork on a package of meat that you buy in the store is in no way a representation of what is the reality of how much of our food is being raised. So with this increase, with these no land farms, here we find a couple years later that all of a sudden we have this, we're going to invest in renewable energy, right? Renewable energy that's going to take us off this system. Everybody in their head, and even in all the advertisements, they show, the solar farms, they show the wind farms, but what's really going it's what they call biogas. And they're very good at PR. I mean, you're dealing with the oil and gas industry and big ag. So just think of the word bio, right? Immediately that has this very flowery kind of, this is a renewable, recycle, biogas. I refuse to call it biogas. I call it factory farm gas because this is not biogas. This is actually a market that is being created to take on the waste stream of the industry. So while they're advertising that this is going to solve environmental justice problems and it's going to fix our water quality too, it is also going to take the broiler litter that's being land applied because it's all running into our waterways. Our waterways are all they're contaminated. And now we're going to create renewable natural gas. Well, they're very good at half sentences too. The renewable natural gas is going to come not from the family farmers all across the state. It's going to come from the processing plants all across the peninsula, their wastewater stream. And I'm talking Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. So while Sussex County cannot manage its own waste from this industry, now we're going to invite other states not to bring their little family farm, broiler litters that they want to tell you, but to bring the processing plant waste. And our tax dollars are now going to be classifying this as renewable energy and creating a new waste stream that we're supposed to be running from with oil and gas. And we're just going to call it green and say, let's have at it and be on our way. Well, I hope there are no children on this. I'm very passionate. They're bastardizing the program, okay? We've been sold a bill of goods that doesn't exist. This has nothing to do with investing in a form of energy that is supposed to move us to the next century, right? In a positive way to protect us from the devastating effects of climate change. Why would we run to gas when we're trying to get away from oil and gas? I mean, you can't even reason it in your head to make sense, which is probably why they show everybody pictures of solar farms and windmills, right? But we have to be wiser. Every state has what they classify renewable portfolio standards, where so much percentage, you were talking about, that has to come from. So you need to think, because when they're talking about those percentages, we want to think, oh yes, this is great. This is going to, take us in a positive way and fix climate change, not if we're foolish about it. And this is just being foolish about it, pure and simple. There's no way to wrap this in a gift bag and say this is going to save us, because basically it's a Christmas gift to the industry. This is a way that they can externalize their waste stream onto everyone else, while telling you they're going to fix the climate problems. When I said half sentences, the one thing about their factory farm gas projects that they're doing, they all have something that is an end product, which, guess what, has to be land applied. So while they're telling you they're getting rid of land application, they're bringing from the peninsula 3 states worth of stuff now that has to be land applied, called a digestate, which is actually more soluble in water and very heavy in phosphorus, which we're trying to keep off our fields because they're overloaded with it. So this is going to just create more problems. So it's great that you guys are spending time investing in this, because the one thing that we have learned here in Delmarva, we actually just had a bill in Maryland to try to strip out the dirty energy out of the renewable portfolio standards, because guess what? If we're not paying for the waste stream, they're not doing it, because there is no reason for them to do it. It doesn't make sense to do it. But because they're going to get value out of this externalized, it looks pretty good on paper. So we have to be very wise to that and insist that we don't waste this opportunity, because truly there's 2 directions we can go, and we can really work towards fixing the problem, but we have to be there to guard that. There is a very muddied waters. What we're seeing here is a lot of the industry is giving a lot of checks to some big green groups who are telling folks that this is good for you. And that's appalling to me, because the communities where they are citing these projects, every single community where they have tried to cite this is a community that we call an environmental justice community. They are overburdened with pollution, English as a second language, super active Superfund sites. And they're putting them in these areas because there's no political power. There is no power to fight back. And this is a story we hear again and again and again. We just heard it before me. I ended up running from my house. You're not going to see these go in wealthy white areas next to the governor's house. I can guarantee you that. They're not going to put them down here on Rehoboth Beach or in Lewis, Delaware, in the wealthy beach coastal resort areas. Where they are putting them is where families are really being threatened. And when we're talking about something that is biogas or factory farm gas, it's like putting a mini refinery on a site. And these are being placed, by the way, in Delaware, in ag residential zones again. There are risks of explosions. I mean, this is appalling. It's appalling. So the time is now, and I'm so glad, and we're seeing all over the country, groups reaching out from various states and banding together and bringing the story forward. Because what we find is the industry has done a really good job with PR and with the legislators. And when we go and sit and talk to legislators, the first thing we hear is we had no idea. You know, we hear this is renewable. So it's so important to carry that message. I know we all think that we're doing a million, you know, and one things, but like I said, a lot of times the folks that represent us, they're dealing with so many issues that our voice can't get drowned out. And, you know, industry has their voice all day long. There has a capital. So it's really important to take that time. So whether it is just a simple email, if it is just a simple phone call, it's better if you go into their office and have a discussion with them. You'd be surprised that you can change opinions. There are some that you'll never change, and I think we all know that. But there are some who are there trying to do the right thing. So it's important that it's very clear and not muddled.
Great, thank you. Well, you covered a lot of things, and I love that Roberta and Noretta and Maria, you're all finding the commonalities between the stories of the impacts of Vermont's energy consumption on communities that have already really suffered from colonialism and extraction and social injustice. If other folks have questions for Maria, please put them in the chat. I guess one last thing from my list is, have you noticed an increase in biogas facilities and CAFOs in your area? Well, you kind of said that the CAFOs have gotten bigger and bigger, but yeah, like, what's the increase you're seeing and why? Why do you think that is?
We're literally, I call it, we're playing whack-a-mole here. This is what I'm doing, like, for now, at least the past 2 years. And we were successful in getting one stopped. We were successful. Maryland Department of Agriculture ended up pulling a $2.4 million grant that was going to go to it because of the public outrage that money was being given to a project that was going to impact a Haitian Creole, English as a second language community next to a landfill already overburdened with pollution. And that money ended up getting pulled. And guess what? When the money ended up getting pulled, guess who left? Oh, when the money for the waste stream's gone, guess who doesn't want to build anymore? Okay, so that's an important takeaway. The other important takeaway is that your voice has power. And as much as I wish we could stop everyone, we're dealing with folks like BP with a 15-year contract. We're dealing with folks like Chesapeake Utility. Chesapeake, I left from Pennsylvania, so I went through 10 years of the gold rush there with the natural gas and the promises. And I can tell you, that taught us a whole lot about this phase. This is being sold as a new technology and something that's going to fix problems, right? But these have 15-year contracts, 20-year contracts. You can't undo what's been done. So the time, I think, for everyone to really jump in, get the money pulled, because I'm telling you, the projects do not go forward without that money. Any economist would fall off a cliff if you tried to hand them a plan where they said they were going to take broiler litter and create natural gas out of it. Because firstly, broiler litter is dry. You have to add millions of gallons of water to even get it to the consistency that you would need to put it, to create their natural gas. That's usually a liquid. So it makes no sense, even from that standpoint, with the way it was being sold. But it was because they were lying. Literally, there was just a local permit, and this is the result of this policy, right, that they're trying to push. A local permit where there is a historical, rich in history, the Phyllis Wheatley School down here, which was built years and years ago by the DuPont family for the African-American children, I think about 1920, 60% majority Black. The children in the playground would be facing, they have a FERC application in now to put a $34 million compression station to compress natural gas. And they came with an application to the county and said, you know what? We know we're getting gas. We don't know if it's going to be renewable natural gas, if it's going to be this, if it's going to be that. We don't know. We don't have the contract set in. We don't know how much. We don't know the truck route, but please give us a permit. And in the background, I found, oh, there's a FERC application for a $34 million compressor station at this site. They forgot to mention that to the county. Now, did that stop the county from passing it? No, because our county, or one of those counties you can talk to, you're blue in the face, and we know who butters their bread. But the point is, like, look at the threat. I mean, you are talking about the risk of explosion, and they're putting it next to a school playground. So unfortunately, we have to be very wise. And I think that the examples that you've seen tonight are so powerful, because it doesn't, in Baltimore City, okay, they're fighting incineration as waste incineration as a renewable form of energy. So industry is well aware of this new policy, and they're cashing in on it. And like I said, this is a make or break moment in our history. I really, honest, from the bottom of my heart, I don't think there's anything more important right now than this, and making sure that we get this nonsense out of there, because this is totally going to change our direction forever. Here's the opportunity. The legislation is supposed to take us in another direction. Don't let them capture it. Don't.
Wow, Maria, that was a perfect segue. Thank you so much for bringing so much wisdom and experience and knowledge over that. And the perfect segue is that this is the fight we're having in Vermont right now, that we have actually an opportunity to talk to our state senators about whether or not we're going to classify biogas and renewable natural gas and a few other pieces under, if we're going to call it clean or not. So thank you so much, Maria. I'm going to pass it off to my coworker, Jael, to talk very briefly about what the campaigns in Vermont are looking like on these two issues.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we have our climate justice campaign. And when we talk about climate justice, this is the example of what we mean. Like the stories that we heard from these presenters tonight are the stories that we're trying to lift up with our Just Transition campaign, and, protect these people. We don't want to move our pollution in Vermont just to these other communities. And so Green Mountain Power currently is saying that they've met all the renewable energy goals because they're counting the energy from Hydro-Quebec. But as we can see, it's really not renewable or green or just. And currently we've been working on the Clean Heat Standards bill, which we mentioned earlier. And this bill is basically asking that biofuels are included towards those renewable energy credits. So Vermont Gas could replace their fracked gas with biofuels and then say, look, we're meeting our green, our renewable energy standards. And so we've been pushing back on that piece of legislation, asking for biofuels to be removed from eligibility for clean heat credits because of the harm that this energy is going to cause in other communities, and the harm it already is causing because that energy is going to be sourced from CAFOs and industrial agriculture. And currently Vermont Gas is, well, the PUC gave Vermont Gas permission last year to source 1% or to purchase methane from a waste treatment facility in Iowa. And basically that methane is coming from factory farms and sewage treatment, sewage sludge. So Vermont Gas is already trying to use or put a little bit of this in the mix and say that they're meeting their renewable energy goals. So we've been working on this campaign and pressing the legislators and it's really the volunteers who have been doing so much work, calling their legislators and asking for biofuels to be removed from the clean heat standards. And you can all go onto our website and read all our demands. And just for time's sake, I don't want to go into too much. But again, we also really need to focus more on real solutions, which includes weatherization. And we want to see the state putting more effort and money into creating programs that are going to weatherize all the houses, because when houses become weatherized, then less fuels need to be burned to heat those homes, and to transition to community solar and then help people get heat pumps and electrify their heating systems. But of course, the state is looking to industry to decide what happens. And so industry is looking for, they're trying to hold on their profits, and they don't want to, they're trying to hide behind renewable natural gas and biofuels as a way to hold on to fracked gas. And then the other thing that we really need to focus on, and which 350 Vermont is hoping to really raise awareness around, is Hydro-Quebec, and how, like Lily said earlier, we're the only state in New England that counts the energy from Hydro-Quebec as renewable. And so we need to, and so Vermont is walking around saying, look at how great we're doing at meeting our climate goals, but really that's basically false advertising, because we're counting energy from Hydro-Quebec. And so that's why organizing is so important. And the work that we do, that we've done for the past 6 months, we need to continue doing that and raising our voices and bringing awareness to these false solutions. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Jael. There are possibilities. There is hope at the end of the tunnel, and there are actual climate solutions we can be implementing in our state that actually will build a just and sustainable future, not for us, but for the communities to the north, to the south, the global communities that we're also connected with. So we've put a few things in the chat, a sign up sheet to get more involved if you're not already, the most recent action link about the clean heat standards, as well as one of the other bills that we've been tracking this session, which is the environmental justice bill. We also have a bunch of really wonderful events coming up this week for Earth Week and in the next few weeks. We're really excited to actually have some in-person outdoor events coming up. So please make your way to one of them. And they're much more hopeful events. They're community building, they're relationship building, they're tree planting, they're family friendly. So come on out and let's continue to build community and build relationships as we do this hard work together. I want to close by thanking our speakers so much. Roberta, Noretta, and Maria, thank you for bringing your stories. Thank you for sharing your community's stories and really being so honest and forthright about what the experience is of Vermont's energy extraction. We so appreciate the work that you're doing and that you're willing to share your stories with us. I also want to thank the North American Megadam Resistance Alliance and Food and Water Watch, who are both doing really important work on this topic. And if somebody besides me wants to put their links in the chat, that would be great. Finally, I want to just give folks an opportunity to think about one takeaway they're taking from tonight. Either something that one of the speakers said, something that you're still kind of thinking about, a question that you're left with, something that you want to incorporate, a to-do you want to do, if it's go and tell Vermont Gas, like, here's what I think about you calling RNG clean in this bill I just got, or what that was that Ben just put in the chat. What's one takeaway from today? And take a sec and write it in the chat, and we'll just kind of hear what people are still thinking about. Oh, thanks, Lily got the Megadam's Resistance folks in the chat. They do really fantastic work, and they have a ton of great resources on their websites about megadams and hydropower, and a bunch of really wonderful videos of speakers talking about more stories about what's been going on. Great, and Food and Water Watch. And I wanted to put in Food and Water Watch has a great fact sheet on so-called renewable natural gas as well. So anyone who's got a takeaway, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll be quiet for 1 sec to actually let you type. Shining the light on the money trail. It's not family farmers who own those CAFOs. It's Wall Street and BP and big places. I see a lot of typing shoulders on your faces in your Zoom screens. Relocalize. Yeah, and low on the traffic scale. I love that, Ned. Yeah, let's keep our energy production and consumption and energy in all sorts of ways, localer and smaller, so we can see what the impact is. We're all in this together. Changing the trajectory really works if people really speak up. Organize, organize, organize. Stop those false solutions and promote the just ones. Waterways is a cultural heart, not simply a power source. Get out the message about the impacts of hydro on the climate. It's not just fossil fuels. Love the land, honor the earth. Stop buying corn-fed beef and hogs and chickens. Yeah. All right, well, folks can keep them coming if they would like. And that's the end of our program tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you again to our wonderful, wonderful speakers. Happy Earth Week, happy almost Earth Day. May we all celebrate together. It's also the towards the end of Passover, and as they say, like next year in a place of peace. So it's like next Earth Week in a place of abundance and solidarity. And I invite you all to do the wild, chaotic moment of taking yourself off mute and all yelling goodbye at the same time.